Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first live Q&A of Vesperisms. I'm just making sure that connections are good and everything's good. You can feel free to type in the chat if you want to let me know that you're here. I'm just going to look over a couple things, make sure I've got all of everybody's questions, and then we'll get started. Just give one more minute for people to come on. Be patient with me. I'm trying to get myself organized here. Okay. Oh, I'm seeing some questions come in, so I just want to make sure that I'm getting all of them in one place so I can answer them pretty succinctly. Okay. All right, everybody. Hello, Kristen. Hello from the Northeast. How's the weather down there? Are you guys slammed? I'm, by the way, having a lovely cocktail that's like a strawberry, basil, and gin thing. It's quite nice. When we do these monthly chats, first of all, I want to thank you all. Oh, icy. Yeah. Be careful. I know people in like south of, let's say, anywhere south of Philadelphia, people don't really truly know how to drive on the ice. So be careful. My first driver's ed lesson was in an ice storm. So I learned that stuff really quickly and on the job. I want to thank you all that are joining me for being new supporters and patrons. I'm really excited to kind of get this conversation going and let you guys know, let you guys get in touch with each other. And yeah, so this is going to be really good. Okay. Yeah, you need one of these gin fusions. It's really good. It would be a perfect kind of spring drink, but I mean, maybe I'm just like thinking of spring. I just really want spring. It's been snowing here all day, but not as bad as we thought we were going to get. So that's good. Okay, I'm going to light a candle and we'll get started. Hi, Nick. Hi, Rachel. Thank you for joining. Now, this is a subscriber-only chat, so you can feel free to put your questions in the chat, or if you've already sent me questions, I've got them. And I'll be checking in before we end just to make sure that no further questions have come in. I don't want to miss anybody. All right. So, welcome. We're in season 2 of Vesperisms now, and we've talked about everything from kintsugi and reconciliation to motherhood, and you got to meet my husband in a little chat between the two of us and kind of get to know how we talk to each other as a couple. These are the kinds of conversations that we have, and we've had 20 years of them. And I tell you, that man still continues to surprise me. I'm like, you think that? That's incredible. I didn't know anybody thought that way. So that's the benefit of a long marriage, I suppose. Yeah. So I'm going to just start with the questions that folks have sent in. And if you guys want to just add anything in the chat, please do feel free. All right. Now, if you didn't know this, I have supporters on 3 platforms: Patreon, Locals, and ThinkSpot. So any of those paid subscriptions, we will have these live Q&As once a month. and you can ask your questions, and then I'll be posting them on my YouTube channel, and probably just on those platforms, but not on the Vesperisms podcast per se, unless we have a particularly juicy conversation. We'll see. All right, so I'm going to start with actually this Anchor message. Back when Anchor used to, I used to host the podcast on Anchor, and this is from Keith. He says that he's lacking community and solidarity in belonging. He wants a place to understand, to be understood and understand others. How do you find a community, a place to be planted and enriched? Do you create one yourself, or do you try to find one? So I think that there's not any one answer to this, but of course, we can look to successful look. So what were the kind of communities of the past that where people felt that they had that sense of solidarity and belonging? Typically it would be a religious community, a church, a synagogue, a mosque, where you would be seeing people regularly on a weekly basis, and there was something about that in person and regularity, right? So I think those are the really key components of a community. So just to recap, if you hadn't listened to the Vesperisms episode on community, I tried to distinguish between the definition of a community and a network. So a community is where you have, it depends more on difference than commonality, but it is a group of people that have mutual stake in each other's lives. So you would find that through a religious community, a faith community. You could find that through a civic community, maybe let's say the school board, or a cause that you feel passionate about that actually does meet together. So, we talked about single interest networks, right? As these groupings that are really just along one kind of line of interest, right? They can happen online, but they're not necessarily people who have a mutual stake in each other's lives. Whereas if that same group was to meet, oh, welcome. If that same group was to meet in person, or at least regularly, even if it was online, and those people were to get to know each other and get to know about each other's lives, then it will become a community. So really, it can become anything. It could be a work group. I haven't been actually employed by an employer in like 20 years, so I don't really know how those things work. Maybe those of you who have employment based jobs, you can tell me, like, are there groups like that at work? So I want to be able to give some help to Keith in trying to find what are the elements of community. And I actually had somebody else write to me today about this same thing. Now that I think about it, that they lost their community a number of years ago, and they've not been able to get it back. And that is really sad. And I think it's kind of a function of the last 20 years of how our lives have gone so much online, that we just cognitively started to believe that that was a substitute for community. And we were kind of enticed, by the fact that, you could meet back up with your elementary school and high school and junior high friends, or like your old work buddies or your sorority sisters or whatever. And we kind of allowed that to function as what we thought was community, when it really wasn't. It's only really when a group of people take, or a pair of people take that relationship offline, that it becomes part of community. And that really does take work. So I think it is kind of it does cut both ways. It is both something that you need to find the areas that those exist in, and you need to put forth the effort. I remember a number of years ago that somebody said to me, and actually I've heard this a lot, that nobody calls me, I'm not in the inner circle of this or that group or whatever. But this person wasn't necessarily inviting people to their, into their inner circle or anything like that. So there's a perception that everybody's kind of getting together without you, and that's really not true. And so it is incumbent on each of us to see, how can we practice an element of hospitality ourselves? How can we move out in confidence and be that host, even if it's for one or two people? I'm seeing engineering politics says there are groups separated by department in my experience where it can become a team game within the company if we don't all have the same goal. Yeah, talk to me about that. So maybe it becomes a clique. Is that what it is that what you mean by that? Or maybe you're working on the same project and maybe that would mean that it had become a single interest network. And then James says sometimes work-related communities can form. There would be restrictions on supervisors or HR people participating. Okay, so that's interesting. Yeah, so okay, so work communities forming would have certain limitations. Yeah, and I understand that. I mean, even as a freelancer, there's certain relationships that you have to keep at a professional level that you wouldn't necessarily invite the person over to your house unless you had really hit it off. Kristen says, yes and no. As an educator, depending on the personalities of my colleagues in the school building, it can be easily fostered, but it can be on a topical level and not necessarily deep. Yeah, right. So taking it beyond that single interest network based thing. I have friends that are educators too, and I know that this is an issue, right? So you want to be able to find your people in the environment that you're in every day, but it can be challenging because there are certain assumptions that you can make, right? Because just because you have the same job or you're in the same field doesn't necessarily mean you have the same interests. A healthy company operates as a community with a common goal, but an unhealthy community operates as small cliques moving toward their own goals. Yeah, I've certainly, when I was working for advertising companies, I certainly remember that very, very, very clearly. Good. And please, feel free to, if you've had something in your experience where you've been able to take that work group out into becoming a community, or forming a community that's outside of work from that, or if there's another aspect to your life that is really functioning as community and it's really working. Sorry, it's an alarm to take out the trash. Real life. Let me know in the comments. I'd really like to know what's working for you. I want to be able to give Keith some helpful hints. Okay. Next question. This is a good one. What are some tips for getting back into figure drawing? Okay. Wow. Good. Okay. Great question. And I immediately, like, 10 thoughts came to my mind. So, first of all, typically in any kind of community-based arts program, if you have in your town, a lot of towns, like my town has a small community-based arts school that's a nonprofit, and you can take classes there. And sometimes those schools will have, a figure drawing night, where they will bring in a model. It's not always a nude model. It's, like they can be clothed. Not all modeling is nude modeling. But like the Society of Illustrators in New York City has Wednesday night modeling nights. And I know that during quarantine, they've been doing those online. I'm not sure if they do have nude models. I don't know how that would work on Zoom. That might be a little weird. But even like Society of Illustrators typically has themed figure drawing nights where they'll have, maybe people dressed up as circus performers or something really fun. So that's one idea. The other idea is that if you have any kind of commute, draw people on the train, the bus, the subway. You have to, sometimes people will get upset, but not often. Actually, it's great to draw people when they're asleep or reading. They don't typically know that you're drawing them, especially if you have a small sketchbook this size, that you can slip in your purse, or that, you could even tuck into your, into a book that you look like you're reading, but you're really drawing. There's all sorts of sneaky ways to do that. So, and I guess I would say start with the people that are in your life already. Ask them to sit for you. So this is something that I'm actually starting doing. I bought a bunch of canvases, and I'm going to be doing portraits of people in my life that are important to me that I'm going to put them up on my wall. They're just small canvases. I'm just going to do quick sittings with friends of mine who feel, safe to do that, and put them up on my wall as just a way to kind of have my community with me when they're not around, and remind me that I am actually connected with people. I think that's something that's really come for me out of quarantine. Okay. Do any of you, if you're artists, do any of you do a figure drawing class in your spare time? I know that's something that I really miss about art school. It was so great when I went back to grad school to have that once a week drawing class where we were either drawing the model or we were going on location to draw. One time we went to Little Italy and drew the cannoli eating contest, and that was kind of an exercise in drawing really fast. Oh, sorry, it looks like I glitched there. Yeah, so the cannoli eating contest was just kind of an exercise in how fast you could capture people shoving cannolis in their mouths. It was actually kind of gross and a little bit nauseating, but it was fun, exciting, lots of adrenaline. All right. What are some ways you are evolving as an artist? Wow, yeah. I have to think about that for a second. Yeah, I mean, this past year has really forced me to adapt quite a bit. It's forced me to deal with my defining myself through hyperproductivity. I am a pretty high output artist. You don't always see that on my Instagram because I'm creating like big volumes of work for my books, which I can't show until, I can show some of the process stuff, but even that, it's not really something I would want to show all the time. So I'm not one of these people that's doing like a finished piece every day, right? So it can be hard to this year when I've seen my peers, my colleagues putting out like these amazing challenges and painting a day kinds of things. I am a high output artist, but that's not how I don't have like stuff to show for it every day. Maybe that's something I need to work on. Who knows? But yeah, so defining myself less by productivity as by the things that to put it simply, like the things that make me happy and the things that bring me peace. So that actually is one of the biggest ways that I've evolved this year as an artist. There's a perception that artists are just like kind of living in this like bubble of inspiration all the time and um that we're just so groovy or like I don't know. I don't know what people think really, but I think that there's sort of a perception about that. But actually there's a lot of, especially when you're a commercial artist, there's so much pressure from the market that you can start to lose your connection to what you're doing emotionally. At least I can, because I'm not an emotion-driven person naturally. So my artwork isn't coming from like this need to like express all the time. I think we talked about that on a thread on the locals community. Um, so yeah, so just like because work didn't really slow down for me necessarily, but I was forced to slow myself down. And so, these landscape paintings that you see behind me, these floral drawings, like gardening, I started taking an icon painting class. I'll show you my latest one here in my sketchbook. This is not complete, but it's in progress. Jesus's hair looks a little bit like bouffantish over here. But anyway, just these things that are more exploratory that will find their way into my work, but allowing myself to do more of that, that personal work. Rachel says she wants to create an ancestor wall with black and whites or sketches. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, what a cool idea. So you mean taking maybe photographs or artifacts from your ancestors and making a black and white or sketch art from that? That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Wow. Kristen, I don't know if maybe you mean the icon. It's been really fun. Actually, the class, it's on Udemy and this is really just like I'm copying the instructor. It's like, he's doing it on the screen and I'm just, kind of doing it here. But of course it winds up looking completely different than his. He's a master. But it has been fun. The icon class has been really, really fun and really like very low stakes. It's been very low stakes. So yeah, and also pottery. I've been doing a lot of pottery. So yeah, I mean, I think, to your question about how I've evolved, it's almost like in a sense devolving. It's calming down. It's like taking my neurological needs into account too, because I do have some like cognitive issues. And just being a little bit more gentle on myself. I know that, and I really resist that too, right? Like that whole like be gentle with yourself, like you are enough, and all this, like I just don't. I'm sorry, like I just don't flow with that. And so the whole concept of like being more gentle with myself, I'm like, ugh, I want to be more gentle with myself. I want to whip myself harder, I just want to like drive the horses forward, all the time. And so that's actually been a real discipline for me. And it has been resulting in better art, I have to say. The art is more fluid, it's more intuitive. Yeah, it really is. It really is good. Okay, take a drink of my cocktail because it's melting. So it's strawberry and basil muddled with a keto-friendly sweetener, gin. I have this really nice French gin, and ice. And seltzer. Yeah, they say club soda, but I don't like club soda. So seltzer. All right. Let me know if you guys have any further questions or thoughts about what do you guys do? Let me know in the chat what if you guys are artists, if you're not. I know Engineering Politics doesn't think he is, but he probably has something creative in there somewhere. I believe it. Yeah, evolving has a component of devolving. Yeah, I mean, gosh, like what this year has done to us, right? It's like it's made a lot of people get back to the basics, right? And figure out what are the things that really matter. And most of the time it's people, isn't it? I'm a frustrated artist in an engineer's body, says James. Okay, James. Here's something cool. So I started watching this show called The Great Pottery Throwdown. Do you guys know about this show? It's like the Great British Baking Show, but it's for pottery. And I use a VPN so that I can watch it in England. Anyway, the guy who well, no spoilers, but there was a guy on that show this past season, not the one that's current. And he was an engineer. Like he was an engineer to the T. And he did his pottery with such imaginativity and it was so ingenious. Like he created this entire tea set based on Alice in Wonderland. And so he took each component of the tea set, the kettle, like the teapot, the cups, and he just like inverted their he flipped them on their heads. So the teapot, you actually the spout was the handle and the handle was the spout. And then he created these cups that had holes in the top. So it looked like if you drank out of it, you're going to spill tea all over yourself. But he did it in such a way that it was impossible for you to spill it. But, there was this element of fear, And so there were all these little fun tweaks in it. But the thing that they kept reminding us all was that he was an engineer, And so he took his engineering know-how to kind of like come up with these creative solutions. It was so fun. It was so fun. So I would love for you guys to watch that show if you find a way to, with a VPN, be able to tune in England. Or if you are in England, it's on Channel 4. Okay, next question. Yeah, James, isn't that cool? That's so fun. I mean, gosh, I would buy a tea set like that just to bust people's chops. It's called The Great Pottery Throwdown. The Great Pottery Throwdown. It's a really fun show. And you know what? What's so cool about that show? It is a competition, but it's not cutthroat. There's no way for you to make alliances or anything. They're just judging you based on the quality of your pottery. and and it's just about excellence and craft, and like you can tell that the people on the show really like each other. It's so wonderful. I love it. My husband and I watch it, and we're like, we're like, man, we're such dorks. Okay, next question. What do you consider bad art, even if it's done with skill? Wow, great question. Ooh, okay, so I would say that anything that falls within the realm of propaganda would be that for me. Spoken word poetry, sorry, not sorry. Okay, engineering politics. I think you haven't listened to enough spoken word. There are some really great spoken word poets out there. Uh, there really are, I promise you. There are some people who are actually amazing. They're not usually the people that get put on TV. I'll just say that. Yeah, okay, so bad art, even if it's done with skill. Okay, I'm gonna actually grab it for you really quick, 1 second. I have this book in my enormous pile of research books that if I could flip my laptop around and show you this pile of research books that I'm dealing with for my Berlin Wall book, you would be shocked and horrified. But so I have this book of Soviet posters. This might be flipped around for you guys, but some of these posters are just stunningly beautiful. Like the artwork in them is just incredible. Okay. So for instance, right? Like that is a beautiful paint, not this guy, but that is a beautiful painting. It's so beautiful, right? But it fits within the body of this body of work that is just about societal control. It's just about one line of thought. And let's see if I can, it's even this sort of noble, right? Like, public service, it's a PSA poster about refusing vodka, right? Like it's an anti-alcoholism poster. I don't know how well it worked, but like beautiful painting, like really totally skillful. Like this artist clearly knows how to turn the form. He knows how to handle paint. He, knows how to get that glint in the eye, that shiny. It's beautiful. Like it's a beautiful painting. But even something like this PSA, in the context that it was created, it's about a totalitarian system that does not let you deviate. It will shun you if you deviate. I have to find this one for you that was, why did I look at this? Oh my gosh, all the heroes, Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin. Oh, look at all this fawning. Yeah, it's just amazing. This is a great book, actually. I really recommend it. It's a little hard to find and it's a little expensive, but there's this one poster that I want to find for you guys where let me know in the chat, how do you guys define propaganda per se? How would you define it? Or even if you don't have like a firm definition of it, what leans that way for you? Is there sort of a way where you can sort of smell it, Let me know. There's this one particular one that I have to find for you. If I don't, I'm going to be sad, but if I don't find it, I'll move on. There's just so many good ones. All right, I can't find it. I thought I had bookmarked it, but it was It was a poster of Stalin greeting some sailors, like some Navy sailors. And the artist had painted him with, like, the wrong hand gestures, and that artist was disappeared. He was never heard from again after he painted that poster. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful poster. He was never heard from again. So, I think that, I'm a big proponent of independence among artists, independent thought, and, yeah, I would just say that that would kinda be the definition of bad art for me, is art that is created in the service of something that the artist does not have, intellectual freedom in. I would have to think of other definitions of bad art. Let me see what you guys are saying. Maybe that it shows you something good while obscuring other things? Yeah, maybe sort of putting too rosy of a glow on something. I mean, I don't have a problem with art that is, like, happy and cheery. I mean, not at all. There art has all different functions. It should make you happy, it should make you think, it should provoke you, it should, do all of those things. I Yeah, but if it's, like, putting a gloss on something that it's not telling you the whole story about something that might have a dark underbelly, that would definitely be propaganda. Propaganda is about control, like you mentioned, but there's a fine line that marketing and advertising follow similar formulas. Bingo, Kristen. So I don't know if you're familiar with Edward Bernays. He was considered the father of advertising, and he wrote a book called Propaganda. And this was back in I want to say the 20s, maybe, before propaganda had the negative connotation that it has now from things like Soviet propaganda or Nazi propaganda. James, a story that is intended to tell a false narrative as if it were true. Yeah. So I'd be interested to know if you thought that the anti drinking poster that I showed you was propaganda according to that definition. So a false narrative as though it were true. Is drinking vodka wrong? Is not drinking vodka wrong? I mean, I'm not sure. Propaganda is, to me, engineering politics says, the attempt to install a narrative where it wouldn't organically arise. Hmm. What do you mean by organically? Do you mean that people wouldn't necessarily draw those conclusions themselves, or tell me about that? And I do have, by the way, the slow comment function on, so there might be a delay in me getting the comments. I didn't want the chat to just kind of run away without me being able to get everything. Um, Basically, yes. So, like, where the artist wouldn't naturally, or maybe where the artist is told to draw a certain conclusion or depict something a certain way that they're being dictated to. Okay, so that's interesting because in commercial art, you're told to do that all the time. So if I do a book cover, then I'm given a brief and I'm told certain parameters that I'm supposed to stick within. And I might read the manuscript and come up with my own spin on things, and then I might be vetoed, or I might be told that it's insensitive, or I might be told that it's I mean, I've never been told that, but that could happen. I think increasingly now there's a lot of, like, sensitivity, um, um yeah, there's, like, sensitivity readers and things like that. But if propaganda in its neutral term is just a way of steering people's opinions, which is what advertising and marketing do, then yeah, I mean, I guess that all commercial art could be considered a form of propaganda. Um, Even things like, dish towels that have sayings on them, like, "It's gonna be a bright and beautiful day," is a sort of propaganda, maybe a sort of benign propaganda. And James says, yes, because the story behind that art is that the moral high ground lies in abstinence. And I would even go further and say that the moral high ground lies in the state. Because in that society, of course, all of that propaganda and all of those public service announcements were coming from the state, capital S. So I think that, if there's an independent commission, let's say, if there's an independent nonprofit who creates, you know, uh, an abstinence poster saying, don't drink vodka, it'll hurt your family or whatever, or it's 10 p.m., do you know where your children are, or, any of these things, right? I would say that's less propaganda. That's more public service, or I'm just thinking of even like posters that I've seen from PETA, um, like equating eating eggs to or eating meat to the Holocaust. Yeah, I mean that crosses a line. So it's not necessarily just the state, but yeah. There's manipulation and then there's persuasion. Okay, right. So by the neutral definition that you're giving, both are forms of propaganda. So yeah, so there is a neutral definition of propaganda that is about persuasion, and that's about advertising. So when you see the Bud Light commercial, that is propaganda. Like they're trying to persuade you by manipulative tactics, actually, to buy their product. Is propaganda a pejorative or neutral term to you? Is there such a thing as positive propaganda? I don't know that I would say positive propaganda. I don't know that I would say that unless, let me take that back for a second, because I think maybe people who have or maybe are people who are in the habit of like dropping leaflets in totalitarian government zones. I won't mention specific ones. That could be a kind of positive propaganda. But I think that, I mean, for myself, I do associate the word propaganda with as a pejorative. I do. The engineers. All right. Do any of you guys have any questions or thoughts peeling off of that? Or any thoughts about recent Vesperisms episodes? We have maybe about 15 more minutes left until I've got to go. But any thoughts about recent episodes that you'd like to share as I take another sip of my cocktail? Oh, let me go see if I can find that question, engineering politics. I see. Okay. So, engineering politics says, from a non-artist, I love your content, especially your last episode. Thanks. Because your artistic worldview, if I may characterize it that way, accesses a part of my brain I can't, or at least it feels that way. I struggled, especially when I was younger, to connect to people because I couldn't understand why people did what they did. Same. I understood the utility of what they did, but I never understood why people seemed to work against their best interests more often than not. Okay, that's an interesting question. Is that whole subject of working against your best interests? That's pretty loaded. As an author, your ability to build characters into fully evolved human beings is something I would never be able to do, but listening to your podcast and doing the one with you, that was awesome, by the way, really helps me step inside your thought process. This, in addition to having kids, is helpful when creating my own content, when understanding the motives of those I see as working against their own stated goals. Is your ability to build characters and the world around them something you were born with or a skill you had to improve over your career? Ooh. Good question. Okay. So, this concept of working against your own interests. I want to kind of think through that first. Because we hear this a lot. And we hear this a lot in regards to the word community, don't we? Communities working against their own best interests. Says who, right? Often that is defined by people who are not in that community or are not in that network. So I question that. I would have to sit with that characterization a little bit in terms of, what, and let me know in the chat, like, what do you mean by working? Can you give me an example of somebody or a community working against their best interests? Do you mean self-sabotage? because that I understand. James says, "You're new to me, so I have yet to watch your podcast." Oh, welcome. Oh, that's wonderful. Really appreciate you having you here. Um, okay, so Kevin, I'm going to wait for you to talk about that in the chat to clarify that for me. But my ability to build characters and the world around them, something I was born with or a skill I had to. Okay, so let me speak to that. So I would say that what I was born with was a curiosity about people, which is the same as you. You can't understand why people did the things that they do, right? Like this, growing up with a parent with mental illness for me, who, I knew somewhat of the history of why things were the way they were in my home, but I couldn't understand all of it because I was young and there were things that I couldn't know yet. Um, but also because part of the mental illness was like an extreme amount of gaslighting that I didn't really see till later. It was more that question of like, am I crazy? Like, I feel like things are this way, but this person's saying that they're that way, or they're acting in a way toward me that I'm like, I completely don't understand. So, but there were other people in my life who were incredibly good to me, and I wanted to understand like why one person would react to me this way and why one person would react to me this way. And neither of them seemed to be necessarily based on what I felt about myself, you know? So, like, my grandparents were incredibly good to me, and they were always praising me and saying these, like, sort of hyperbolic things about me, and I was like, "It's really not that way." Like, I'm not that version that you think I am, and then when my parent would do things, I would be like, "It's really not that way." So, I did wanna understand why people did the things they did, why they allowed certain things to happen that were, like, clearly wrong or clearly unhealthy. Yeah. So, I would say that that kind of curiosity combined with my interest in books and my interest in narrative, even though, like, for a long time I couldn't put that into words. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. So, as a lot of you know, I come to writing late in life. I was an illustrator for, 15, 16 years before I picked up a pen to write fiction. I was a compulsive journaler though, and so, uh, and songwriter and writing poetry and all of that. And so I was always, always asking those questions about why people did what was their motivation. A lot of times people seemed like crazy to me. And I was like, what? Why are you doing this? And I guess a lot of what I noticed was not necessarily like the thing that sparked it for me was not necessarily people acting against their own self-interest, but people who were acting in ways that hurt other people and that they just like didn't seem to care, either know that or care that they were hurting other people. And that's the thing that really kind of got my hackles up was like this sense of justice of like, why are people hurting other people and they don't have to, you know? Um, Let me just read these comments so that I can get a little more clarification. Okay. So an example would be, I am so strapped for cash right now. I can't pay my rent. Do you want to go to Starbucks later? Or what I see in this is like, people who put out appeals on social media, like, we can't pay our rent, or like, we need a new car, or whatever. Like, here's my GoFundMe. But then you see them like diffusing doTERRA oils, which are like really expensive. Um, yeah, like, I'm so broke, but like I have to have my oils, or like I have to have my like really, really expensive vegan diet, or like I have to have my really, really expensive like kale smoothie or something. Yeah. It's just, I don't know. It's the circles I run in, I guess. Um and James says, I've witnessed this in churches. When dogma trumps compassion, the community will divide as people take sides in a conflict over dogma. Yeah. So James, this happened to us actually. We had to leave our faith community because of this very thing. And it was people who we had had relationships with for years, who like were, we had our babies together, like, like, um, who just were so willing on a dime to just, then come up to your face and say, "Rah, rah, rah." Like, people who had sat around my table and like, like we had swapped clothes and I mean, like shared like incredibly intimate, friendship space and community space. And out of, just like loyalty, like questions of loyalty of all things. Um, and a lot of it was because, in my circumstance, now that when this happened, a lot of people got thrown under the bus. But in my particular case, it was that I started asking questions and I got some different answers than what was the party line. Brought this to the leadership, and I was told, why would you question my analysis? Why would you question my narrative? Haven't I been your pastor for these, number of years?" And I just said, anybody who doesn't allow me to ask questions, even ask questions, I can't do it. I have to be able to like use my own mind. And I'm a challenging person, but I'm not looking for a fight, Like, I'll fight if it comes to me, but I'm not looking for one. I want peace, I want people to be happy. I want people to be, to treat each other well, and I want truth. I do like, when you use the word dogma, like, I don't necessarily have a problem with dogma, like, or like, I'm a pretty orthodox Christian, I'm not big O orthodox, but, like, I'm pretty orthodox, That matters to me, like, scripture matters to me, like, all those things matter to me, but yeah, when it becomes dogma, I guess, and it doesn't just become about a pursuit of truth wherever truth leads, but it becomes about dogma and, like, you know, and that takes over, your relationships with people, and I do have some of this going on in my life right now, not over issues of faith, actually, but over issues of politics, which tells you a lot about our state of politics. It really is a very religious conversation we're having right now, and I have friends that are leaving me behind, but I've been there. So, yeah, I've been there. I know how that goes, and it's like I'm willing at this point to say, "Bless you. If you need to leave my life, then that's okay. That's what you need to do. Maybe you'll come back. Door's always open." Um, so yeah, I would say like the ability to build characters comes just from that question of like those questions of human motivation. And I guess where yeah, it is something that you build skill with over time in terms of like how you shape that and the kinds of questions that you ask of your characters and how you allow them to reveal themselves to you. But yeah, it's a skill, but I think what makes it really interesting is when you see history through that lens and you see history as not just, a collection of data and facts and figures, but you see it, you know, Kevin, as why people do what they do. What is that human motivation? And when you start to think about that in terms of movements or governments, or like political theories, then it starts to become really interesting because then you start to get into the psychology of groups. And I think that's particularly why I'm asking these questions lately about community versus network and why, how people start to think in groups and kind of our the tragic loss of people being able to think and come to conclusions for themselves based on, a broad view of things and being able to really steel man like so for example, like one thing that I'm trying to do right now with this book about the Berlin Wall going up is I'm really trying to steel man Marxism, Marxism, socialism, communism, Marxism, Leninism, all of these different offshoots, of communist theory, even critical theory, like as sort of part of that universe, which it is. Um, and I'm trying to steel man, capitalism. And like, so there's, for instance, a really great book called Divided Memory the Nazi past in the two Germanys. And it's Dr. Jeffrey Herf is talking about the response to the Nazi past in East Germany among the communist government and in West Germany among the like Western democratic government. I won't use the word capitalist because that is actually a definition that the East used for the West. And it's not really a fair comparison. I would say it's communist versus democratic. So they each had their own response to the Nazi past. And in the West, and they're both flawed. Like they both have their good and their bad, right? So the response in the Western part, in the Western society was, hey, we've got Nazis here. The whole country was replete with them. You can't punish all of them. We hung a bunch of them in the Nuremberg trials. But like you'd have to basically annihilate the whole country if you wanted to purge Nazism completely, right? So like, when the Allies came in, when the American army came in, they tried to enact this whole policy of denazification, and they found that it was like you had to have like tiers and like levels of influence, and it was like impossible. Okay, you'd really literally have to just like throw everybody in jail, and you couldn't have a society. You couldn't rebuild like that. And so the Western approach was, okay, we've got Nazis here. We're going to try to rehabilitate. We're going to like move forward. Like there's already corporations now. That has big flaws. Okay, like that's how we have companies still around today who have like deeply disgusting Nazi pasts, who like manufactured Zyklon B and all of these things, right? That are still functioning today. Well, in East Germany, the approach was overwhelmingly to suppress, deny, and create a new narrative that basically said, we are the anti-fascists. Nazism doesn't exist here. All of the Nazis are in the West, which was completely not true. And there was even the East German government published a book, like pointing the finger and saying, you have these high profile Nazis in your judiciary and blah, 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 blah. And I think it was called the Brown Book or something like that. And so the West was like, okay, we can play that game too. And they named all of the East German, former Nazis who were in high positions in that government. And so, it's like, issues of complicity. It's like, how are you going to police these things? So I guess what I'm saying is, it's the really long way around, Kevin, to answering your question is like, I am really interested in what people tell themselves about themselves and what people tell themselves about the movements they're part of, and I'm trying to steel man both sides of that, because it's human beings. It's human beings making choices about the way they're going to proceed forward in a very fallen world. I can see why people do that. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I've got a couple more questions in my previous questions, in the pre-asked questions. Try talking to a group of teachers, principals, and administrators fully invested in critical theory. It's insightful. Yeah. So I read your post earlier today about that experience, and yeah, I mean, I think that from listening to your experience, it looks like, and from my experience too with this, I think that people's motivations, by and large, really are good. Like they really are motivated by compassion and by wanting people to be okay. Like we just want people to be okay. And if we hear about, okay, so something I'll say is, I think that we had come a really, really long way from 1964 till now, or like, because one of the things I'm studying alongside the Berlin Wall stuff is the civil rights movement, which was happening concurrently with that. So in 1961, when my book is set, that's when all the freedom rides were happening. When Black and white people were getting on buses together and deliberately trying to, create civil disobedience by crossing state lines on a bus together, and to challenge local municipalities to follow the law which had been passed by the Supreme Court, that had been upheld by the Supreme Court, that desegregated buses along state lines, right? And so there was all this civil disobedience going on at that time, and so, to think that in 1961 you could get thrown in jail or pulled off a bus or, like, your bus set on fire for a Black person and a white person sitting together on that bus, we have come a long way from that. It cannot be denied, okay? There may be other problems, but, like, that cannot be denied, that we have come a long way. And so I think that the expression of people feeling so strongly about anti-racism really actually shows how far we've come, because you know, it's hard to be like, "Racism is bad," and, like, disagree with that. Like, nobody disagrees with that, you know what I mean? And so I think that you have people who are, like, very well motivated or very well intentioned, but don't understand that critical theory it is an ontological frame. It is its own theory, that, you know, can be questioned. It can be questioned, and it leads to certain outcomes, and those things need to be discussed, and we need to be able to ask each other, is this really what we want? And is this really what we mean by racism? And is this, like, we have to define the terms, And so, without going on too long about that, Kevin, like, yeah, I mean, what you did was really important. And the way that you framed it, I thought wasn't aggressive or provocative in any way. It was just kind of alerting people to say, "Hey, is this really, you know, is this the only way to think about this? Is this the only way that we can try to combat this problem? Because we all want our kids to be okay, right? So if we start from that place of commonality, yes, we want our kids to be okay. We want children to not be the ones that pay for the mistakes of adults all the time, because it's always the children that pay." So let's see. Rachel says, "My son has a degree in German and he spent time in Berlin. Our conversations about how the wall came down are so powerful." Rachel, I'd be interested to know what generation your son is in, how old your son is. Um, Kevin, let me just take a quick look at your question and see if I have time to get to it. Um, Talk about curiosity when looking at why people do what they do. I'm in a position where I hire engineering staff within my company, and the most important characteristic I look for in a candidate is intellectual curiosity. Yeah. As I define as the motivation or initiative to learn new things without being asked to. Oh, great. The hardest part is asking the right questions to know if a candidate has intellectual curiosity. Yeah, wow. Can you identify what you consider curiosity in other individuals? Is this something you can instill into your kids? So, I know that this is sort of unpopular, but, like, there's sort of a, a mocking that people will do over, like, you have to look at both sides, right? Because we're being pushed into a cultural narrative that says, no, there is only one acceptable side. And that's just not true. I mean, I was reading some stuff today on completely unrelated topics, right? Actually, like, I was reading some articles in Tablet, and which you should all read Tablet. It's an amazing magazine. Um, but it was just clear that, like, wow, the world is so complex. There's so much to talk about, so many different topics to talk about, so many different things to be curious about. And it's not everything falls into this binary of, like, this side or that side. Like, you can funnel this is almost like, this is kind of magical thinking, right? That you can, like, there's a theory of everything, right? Like, you can funnel every subject through this kind of, like, sieve, funnel sieve, mixing my kitchen tools here. But, like, you can kind of sift it all down into one of two binary choices, and it struck me like, no, there's just so much amazing stuff to consider, like, as I plan my garden for this summer, and I'm thinking about, like, oh my gosh, am I going to have yet another year of failed seed starting, like, I've never had success with seed starting. Like, what does that have to do with other than, like, nature? It doesn't have to do with politics, it doesn't have to do with constructs or anything like that. And so, um I think I would just, in what I consider curiosity in other individuals is like just, what's the last book you read? What kinds of things are you interested in outside of work? Like what are your hobbies, And I think, circling back to like the beginning of this conversation, um how have how I've changed as an artist over this year and the things that I've like allowed myself to open up to, like landscape painting and ceramics. Yes, these are all still within the realm of art, and I'm sorry, but I know enough to know, like in my genre, that these are very, very different things. Like these two paintings behind me are like very, very different from what I do as an illustrator, and they're ways that are like opening up kind of new vistas for me to see the world. You know, and then in terms of like instilling it into your kids, yeah, I mean, just like that is a really tough job, actually. That is a really tough job because there's so much out there that you could just sit your kids in front of an iPad and walk away and let somebody else, introduce your kids to the world. But it really involves, getting out into nature, meeting a lot of different kinds of people, like not sheltering your kids from different kinds of people. Like when my kids were little, like little, we lived in an inner city neighborhood, and they knew everybody. Like, there wasn't anybody that I tried to shield them from, and I even knew that the guy next door was dealing drugs, and we still, he was a human being, and so he was our friend. I mean, obviously, I, like, kept them, within parameters, like, I was, we did have to, duck down out of the windows a couple of nights, but, yeah, it was just like they know a lot of different kinds of people. They and the good, the bad, and the ugly. We don't shelter them from all kinds of people. So yeah, and just different experiences. Traveling. There's a big world out there. It's a really big world out there. Okay, just gonna read these last couple of comments. Kevin, thank you. I really appreciate you coming. You always ask the best questions. Um, Kristen, speaking of the Berlin Wall, not sure if you've seen the film Goodbye Lenin. Yes, I have. Saw it years ago, and it's still one of my favorite foreign films. So well done. That was such a beautiful film. It was really touching. Yeah, really touching. Like how love can really trump politics. Yeah. All right, guys. Oh, there was one question that I just want to make sure. It was sort of a fun one. I want to make sure I get it. Um, You're stranded on an island, think Tom Hanks Castaway style. What 3 items would you bring? I think about this from time to time, and it's always different. Suppose I would bring some sort of item to desalinate the water. I guess a pot. I would bring a cooking pot, some kind of really good cooking pot. Um, I would bring my kids' baby pictures because those are irreplaceable, and probably my letters from my husband, our love letters. We have a box of them because we got together right at the dawn of the internet. And so we have a big box of letters. And on Valentine's Day, he surprised me by bringing a stack of them to the place where we went to get cocktails. And we read them, read a couple to each other. It was really sweet. Yeah, Rachel. Yeah, good point. Okay, maybe we'll talk more about propaganda and East and West Berlin next time. I don't know. Start thinking about your questions now. We'll do this again in March. I will post the link to that shortly and the date for that. I don't have a regular date for these Q&As yet. I'm going to try to like corral them into like, I don't know, maybe third Thursday or something like that. But if you have friends that you think would be interested in becoming Vesperism supporters, either on Patreon, Locals, or ThinkSpot, there is a free promo code for 3 months on Locals. I haven't figured out how to do this on Patreon or ThinkSpot yet, but on Locals, if you type in, when you go to subscribe or support, you can enter the code free Vesper, and that will give you 3 months free in the Vesperism Locals. All right. I've got to stop there. Oh, Kevin. Okay, what would you bring to the island? Physician's desk reference, hollowed out. I love this. Inside, waterproof matches, Good point. Iodine tablets, beet seeds. Beet seeds. Okay, Dwight Schrute. Protein bars, NASA blanket, and in case I get bored, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Okay, so it was a Dwight Schrute joke. Wait, oh, so was that whole thing a Dwight Schrute joke? Did I just it's been ages since I watched The Office. All right. I gotta run, you guys. This was awesome. Thank you. Um, I'll see you next month. And yeah, tell a friend about any of those communities that if you think they would like to join. And I will have another episode of Vesperisms coming out shortly. But in the meantime, listen to the one on gathering. Let me know your thoughts in the communities. And I mean, are they communities? Are they networks? I don't know. I don't know. All right. Take care, you guys. All the best. Bye.